Okay, so you guys know how Yoshi was cut from Smash Ultimate's box art, right? Well, I think I have a reason for that, and you're gonna love hearing this. It's because they needed to make room for the age rating, because that's how graphic design works. And because he committed tax fraud. Okay, listen, guys, we need to talk. There's more than one joke on the planet. Like, you don't need to get these credits off the screen. The video just started. Well, it's about dang time I made another E3 video. Yeah, in case you didn't know, for a while I made an effort to make a video reflecting on my favorite games that were shown off at each year's E3, but I just skipped out on the past few years because I suck. Well, to be fair, when I made these videos, I was always late to the party because I wanted to take some time to gather my thoughts, and countdowns aren't the easiest thing in the world for me to make. Plus, it's a video about me talking about video games. If you care that much, then you're lame. Sorry, I don't make the rules. Well, now, I'm still late to the party, but at least now I'm back to do this, but in a different way. Those E3 videos I used to make were top 10s, or in one case top 15, but this time instead of cherry picking certain games that I'm more than likely not going to pick up in a few years, I'm going to observe all the conferences too, while still cherry picking certain games that I'm more than likely not going to pick up in a few years. Right. Well, the way this is gonna work, I'm gonna look at each conference one by one, talk about what I feel like talking about, make some dumb jokes, you know, whatever. If it's something worth mentioning to me, then I'll mention it. EA's kinda always been the laughingstock of these press conferences. Every time an E3 rolls around, I always have that strange level of excitement to wonder how the virgin EA can continue going about its own duties while we wait for the Chad everything else. I realize I may be condescending to a multi-million-dollar corporation, but every year is the same. We got some obviously scripted interactions.
I chased that money. I still got my diploma, but I chased that money.
There you go. We're out here chasing money.
Awkwardly, barely scripted interactions.
But I just wanted to take a minute to pause and reflect. Standing next to this trophy is a little bit surreal. You know, growing up,
and shoutcasting all esports like over a lame mobile game you probably forgot about shortly afterwards. The one unique thing struck out to me, and that's how they had to reassure for multiple games that
no loot boxes.
No loot boxes.
And that was when I realized that any hope I had for Anthem went completely down the toilet. They reassured us that they fixed all the problems from Star Wars Battlefront going into the sequel, and based on what I heard, they did, but just created a whole lot of new problems. So now I'm just waiting to hear about how Anthem will make headlines for talking points on how, I don't know, last year was loot boxes and how it's tied to gambling. Maybe this time it'll be about religion. With EA, it's pretty much the end times that never end. In other words, should this game fuck up, BioWare's mostly done for, given how Visceral Games turned out. Although, the indie titles they present do look good and have way more promise than all the AAA games. Unravel 2, for instance, didn't expect that, looks twice as adorable as the first one, and was released on the same day it was shown off, and by the looks of it, yeah, pretty good. So, kudos to those guys. Keep being awesome, and I hope EA doesn't screw you over too hard. They're gonna get screwed pretty hard. I did not expect Microsoft to have this good of a conference this year. Don't get me wrong, there were maybe a few boring parts here and there, but for the most part, there wasn't much talking about games as there were showing off games and making new reveals. If I had a reference to provide on how gaming companies should structure their conferences, I'd show them this. Only fitting that right after one of the worst conferences, I talk about one of the best. Maybe it has to do with them not showing Minecraft in 8K. I don't know. And it'd be one thing to show off games over and over, but there was a lot of good stuff this year. New Cuphead DLC, for instance, with new worlds, new characters, new salt, of course. We got a brand new Battletoads game, which I am super excited for, but of course, the one goddamn game to not have gameplay ready, it had to be the one that looks like a comic book and not have a new game in 24 years. Thanks! Of course, we also have new titles and franchises I really want to try, like Ori 2, Kingdom Hearts 3, Devil May Cry 5. I bought all of those games off the Steam sale just because I was excited for this one. Well, most of them, but if any of them are a fraction as flashy as that trailer, consider me hooked. Meanwhile, FromSoft's new game, Sekiro Shadows Die Twice, has samurais and grappling hooks, and it looks really dope, but this really weird thing is just sticking out to me, and I don't know how to feel about it. Though, considering it's FromSoft we're talking about here, it's gonna get bullshit really quickly. And of course, Jump Force 2! There have been plenty of anime Smash Bros. Games before, but this one looks like it has a really huge budget. And they even managed to pull in Death Note in the mix too, and that's... Wait, what the fuck? I mean, I'll be honest, there wasn't much I could personally get out of Bethesda. I mean, the first good chunk of the show was actually really boring. Maybe that's my fault because I'm not too terribly invested in Bethesda's games and I want to try to watch as many conferences as I can, but I cannot be fricked to tell you anything notable in that first act. Other than this.
Well, thank you, Tim. Yeah!
That happened. But then we get to that second half. I'll just get this right out of the way. Yeah, the Skyrim bit was funny, but I honestly don't think that was enough for me to say, guys, Bethesda won E3! But acknowledging the meme about how Skyrim was released on everything by releasing it on the Amazon goddamn Alexa, you were almost there. In regards of games, I mean, New Doom, Elder Scrolls, I mean, that's pretty good on paper. I've never played any of those games, and actually, I kind of want to defend that practice of showing strictly logos, because Doom and Elder Scrolls are popular enough, and especially with the case of Elder Scrolls, don't have games all that often, to where just confirming their existence is kind of a big deal. I mean, Nintendo can sure as hell get away with it, with logos for Metroid Prime, Bayonetta, Smash Brothers. If they just showed a logo for a Mario game, would anyone really care? Probably not, because Mario has a lot of presence as is, so something like that you kind of have to show off gameplay. Granted, this doesn't always work, but I still thought it needed to be said. Tangents aside, the only other game I want to mention is Fallout 76. Now, on one hand, I have no idea how to feel about how much emphasis it has online, but on the other hand, I don't know, man, the fact that it's based off of my home state holds a special place in my heart. I remember letting out a hearty, holy fuck, when I saw a sign in a video game based on a place I've actually been at. Hey, I don't get out on that often, so moments like these are special to me. The most I can say about Devolver was that it was a live-streamed show that happened during the days of the E3 conferences. To be fair, there really isn't much you can say, because Devolver puts less focus on games than they do just making fun of everyone. It got a few chuckles out of me, I'll give them that, although it does seem kinda weird to me that Devolver satirized showing the dumbest ideas and people will immediately cheer for it, in the midst of all this dumb shit that gets cheers and claps out of people, myself included. Hindsight sucks. Although my friend Pedro looks really good. Look at this shit. Well, Square's presentation was only a short half hour, and I'm curious to see where Platinum's new game Babylon's Fall is gonna go, but besides that, I mean, didn't really cover much we hadn't already seen. And anything that was unique to this presentation, I personally didn't really care all that much for. And I'll admit, this isn't really like me to say, but Square's biggest downfall was not giving us any new info, or any mere B-roll footage over games that most fans would have loved to see. I personally wish there was at least something, I don't care how little, something, on the World Ends With You Final Remix, that Final Fantasy VII Remake, or even that Avengers project. Like, what happened to that? I know, they have their reasons as to why they didn't show any of those off, but a mention would have been good. Otherwise, yeah, if I skip this one, you wouldn't catch me crying, is all I'm saying. I tried to find a good way of how I can explain what Ubisoft is doing, and I think I got something. Ubisoft is still Ubisoft, but only slightly better than they used to be. They still have their moments, granted, but at least I can look back and say, I've seen worse. I didn't like seeing the Donkey Kong expansion, Beyond Good and Evil 2, and despite the new Trials game. Though the game that got my attention the most was Starlink Battle for Atlas, and all I gotta say, if you're getting this game on anything other than the Switch, I'm not gonna say you're wrong, but what in the goddamn are you doing? I didn't watch the PC game show, so I don't really care. Though, what I do care about is that I had to download a multi-hour video for a few seconds of B-roll, so yeah, that's great. Okay, I know these past few segments have been rapid fire, but that's the end of that. Time to get to the big ones. In case you weren't aware, I watched Sony's conference with friends on a live stream, so I technically already gave my thoughts on that, but I imagine most of you wouldn't have known or even remembered if I didn't bring that up, so even still, here's my extended thoughts on that. I thought of a way to sum up my feelings for a while, and I think I have a decent way of putting it. Sony just really wants to be different, or at the very least, just do their own thing. I mean, it's clear they do things their own way and have their own stances on their business practices, like crossplay, for example, and how they want nothing to do with that. On paper, you know, whatever. But if it weren't for how polished graphically and gameplay these games look, I would have put Sony at the bottom of the goddamn barrel for this year's E3. Nothing says experimentation like spending time on The Last of Us Part 2 and then going into a super long intermission. Like, it was a half hour, and at that point, it was just non-stop talking and only one game being shown off. In my opinion, Sony should just use all their experimental stuff on events outside of E3, and even the PlayStation experience, and just use those times to do what everyone else is doing. Remember what I said about taking notes from Microsoft? I wasn't kidding. But I can give Sony this. Whatever time they spend on games, even if it's overshadowed by the boring bits, they know how to use those gameplay bits to get me on board. Like Death Stranding. We had no idea what this game was going to be for the longest time. Hell, I was half convinced this wasn't even a game. And then we actually got gameplay, and well, with each passing trailer, I feel like I only know less. But, I mean, Ghost of Tsushima, yeah, it looks really pretty. And it features samurais, so immediately it's on my watch list. I can't wait to see how we go from this to that one shot in the trailer, though. The Last of Us 2 and Resident Evil 2 both look as if they're using their game engines as well as they can. The former continuing off of the first game's tactic of treating combat as a puzzle game and giving badass set pieces, and the latter combining the best parts of the series into one game. Capcom, stop doing fighting games and just make more of everything else. But no more cloud-based games. That's horseshit. And then there's Spider-Man. At first, I thought the game just looked good, and that's it. But after that trailer on Prison Island, showing most of the villains and Spidey roaming around New York, I'm now all in on this. Just stop making your conferences bad. That's all I'm asking. Being as transparent as I can, with every E3, Nintendo's what I always look forward to the most. Even if this year, Smash Bros. Basically dominated not just the Direct, but the entire internet. I'll get to that in a minute, but of course I want to give brief mentions of a few other titles. I know I just said I try to be as transparent as possible, and that applies all the same, but right now I'm mixed on Pokemon Let's Go Pikachu and Eevee. On one hand, you know, it fits casual players, and they'll get a chance with these games and with Pokemon Go integration, and, you know, good for them, and I'm happy this game exists. But on the other hand, I am neither a casual player nor a fan of Pokemon Go, so if I end up buying this, it's not gonna be soon. Also, I just want to talk about this for a moment. Yeah, I do think it's a dumb mechanic to force onto players and would be a deliberate detour, and it would be even dumber if they did this throughout the entire game with all the gyms, but it's one Pokemon, it's not the end of the world. And I know in this game, Pikachu and Eevee learn Double Kick, but if you're playing the Pikachu version, then you better pray you're not going to come across any ground moves. It's really too early to call, so if this really is confirmed to be all the gyms, I'll eat my words then. As I was going through the footage for the treehouse, I noticed that the guy referee person man said for those who have never challenged a gym before, we have them use those Pokemon, which would kinda imply that this is probably going to be a one-time thing to help ease players into challenging gyms. Now, this is still too early to confirm, and again, I could be wrong, but I felt like this strengthened my point, and I thought it was important enough to stop the video and just record this really quickly, so there you go. Now, anyways, new Mario Party, finally, and without that goddamn car, so that's already a good sign, but, and I don't mean to crush anyone's hopes, but it's still being developed by IndieCube, and even without the car, those results have been very mixed. But I don't feel like calling it dead on arrival off the bat. Maybe it'll be good. Hopefully it'll be good. Another surprise for me, personally, was Dragon Ball FighterZ on the Switch. I try to get into traditional fighters, it's not my thing, but I've heard that FighterZ is a bit easier to grasp than most traditional ones, so who knows, maybe I'll pick it up. What else? New Fire Emblem. So now the fanbase is gonna find something to fight over because that's all they're good at. Alright, fuck everything else, now for the big one. I've seen criticism towards Nintendo about the heavy emphasis of Smash Ultimate and how it overshadows pretty much everything else and what little that is, and to a certain extent, I can see why. But considering this game's primary goal, bringing back everyone, including Wolf, my mans, I wouldn't blame them for wanting to show all that off. Not to mention, there was going to be a tournament with professional Smash players on that same day. So going into specifics on the mechanics and what was changed and what was added had to be a key point. And even if there wasn't a tournament, pro players would still show up, and fans would absolutely have questions for them and, you know, blah 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 blah. And plus, it's not like it was a boring time, because this game is going to be a goddamn blast, and that's just the facts. all of these changes they're doing with the character buffs and these new mechanics, Echo Fighters have a lot of potential and could give new characters a shot of being playable that were otherwise shrugged off. Oh, and of course Ridley, not being too big, but he also has this. So with that, I think it's safe to say that's definitely my most hyped game of the entire show. Is what I would say if my favorite game of all time wasn't being brought to the Switch. Guys, I called it.
One day I'll have my moment.
Okay, sorta, but all I wanted was a release date, and I sort of got it. Well, hey, can we put my boy Neko in Smash? I might have been preaching to the choir for most of this video, but these couple of days are definitely up there on events that I look forward to every year. Despite all the goofs and missteps each conference had, almost everything I've watched had something to take away from this year, and I'm thankful for that. Despite not making a countdown about E3 in forever, here you go, have this. So, that's it. I've been Ty, I love you all in the most appropriate way, and I'll see you guys next time.